For your next acrylic blending practice activity, you're going to work through the basics of the color wheel. Some of you might be familiar with the color wheel, some of you, this might be your first introduction to it. So we're going to work through kind of the basics of how to blend your primaries, secondaries, and tertiaries. If you feel that you are advanced enough or are familiar enough to go further with your color wheel, and add some tints or some shades as you go closer to the middle of the color wheel, I'm happy to show you what that might look like if you want to kind of challenge yourself a little bit. So to get started, the supplies that you're going to need is your paper with the circle on it, a pencil, your ruler, a paintbrush, and a paint palette with your 3 primaries, which are red, yellow, and blue. So I'm going to start by walking you through these basic colors. Like I just said, the primaries are going to be our red, yellow, and blue. We will also have our secondaries and our tertiary colors. So in order to get your secondary colors, you know, or you might not know, that you blend a primary with a primary. So those secondary colors are orange, green, and purple. And then our tertiary colors fall in between a primary and a secondary. So we're going to have red, orange, orange, yellow, yellow, green, green, blue, blue, violet, and then red, violet. And one thing that's really important to notice about these tertiary colors is that they can have a bias towards one side or the other. That just means like a blue violet, there's more blue in it than there is violet, or a red violet, it's more red than it is violet. So I'm going to start setting my wheel up by drawing halfway, and then on one side I'm going to divide it into 6 equal pieces, so then I can draw diagonal lines from those things, because you're going to want 12 essentially pieces of the pie whenever you get to the point where you're ready to start painting. And once I get these lines nice and even, you're going to have some freedom once you have this stuff laid in. You can get creative. You can make this into some sort of a design, anything of the sort. The only thing that I really want you to focus on is I want to see your primary colors a little bit larger in size. And you can see where I'm marking the primaries and the secondaries. Then I want your secondaries to kind of be the next step down. And then after the secondaries, in between those, you'll have your tertiaries. So have some fun with this. Get kind of creative. It's really up to you, however you want to go about it. Make it look interesting. This is going to be a resource that you're going to be able to use throughout the rest of our acrylic unit. And you could even make it just kind of look like a cool, funky piece of artwork. So once you have all of that design laid in and you think you're ready to go and start painting, again, you'll get your paint palette and you'll have your 3 primaries, which are red, yellow, and blue. And you're going to begin working through your color wheel. I'm going to start with red, and what I would do is I would just go ahead and paint those primaries in first before you start blending. So that way you have a clear reference as to what your mixing needs to look like and stuff like that, because all of the blending, all of your colors mixing, those are based off of your primaries. So it's a lot easier if you let yourself have those in there first, because then you have a very clear reference, like I was saying earlier. Once you get your red painted, you can move on to your yellow or your blue. Use this as a really good time to practice your brush strokes. Sometimes it can be hard to get into tiny little spaces. This is a great practice to get to know your brushes and how to handle that, and also a really great way for you to continue getting to know your medium before we move on to our larger paintings. Again, once you finish that red, I like to move on to the yellow and get that nice and painted and even. And I'm going to continue working my way around these primaries until I'm completely done with the blue. I'm going to want to get a nice even coat throughout all of them. So just make sure you pay attention to that and that you're really paying attention to your craftsmanship even in this color wheel. So once we have our blue done, we're going to start moving into our secondary colors. So the first one I'm going to do is red and yellow combined, and so that's going to make orange. And I'm going to show you my paint palette as I mix it. When you grab paint from another color and you have paint on your brush, just be careful. Notice I'm grabbing it from the side just so that I have some space to leave some of that true yellow. And I'm going to test it out on my wax paper, and that's going to help me just know the color that it's getting into, and that's going to help me see what it looks like. If you put it down on the paper and you realize that it might be a little too red, that is okay. You can come back in and add some yellow, or if it's a little too yellow, you can come back in and add some more red. Just pay attention to your blending. Make sure that it's not leaning too far towards either one of those colors. Once I finish that orange, I'm going to go ahead and use what I have started blending, and I'm going to make my red orange. So this means it's going to have a little bit more red than it does orange. So this is where that mixing is really going to come into play, and you're really going to have to pay attention to the bias and the combination and the proportion of these colors. So you'll see that there's just some slight variation between that red, the red orange, and then the orange. And then I'm going to move on to my yellow orange. So this is going to have a much more yellow tint to it, just more of a yellow hue. It's going to lean more towards that yellow side. Once you finish this combination, you can move on to starting your green. And green, again, is going to be half blue, half yellow. So I'll show you again kind of how I blend those. I'm going to pull some of my yellow and then add some blue into it. Be careful, especially not in like that situation. See how my palette has some orange in my yellow and some red in my yellow. Just be sure that you're paying attention to that and you're not getting some of that orange in that green, because that's going to compromise that color. We're going to follow those exact same steps that we did after you finish painting your green. And you're going to do the green yellow first, and then you're going to go into the green blue. Again, always test your colors before you put them on your paper. That's going to be extremely helpful for you to see how the chemistry of the colors work, how the makeup of those colors work, and how they blend. One thing to keep in mind is different pigments. Different color pigments, they have different consistencies and different opacities. So different colors tend to lay on the paper a little bit thicker. Some are a little bit more heavy on the water side. So that means that it's much more thinner when you put it on. So you're just going to have to pay attention to some of that, especially when you get into your final project, because you might have to do some of that in layers, similar to how we handled our watercolor. If your paint ever looks like it's too dry, feel free to add just a little touch of water, but you don't want it to get too watery, because that can make it, that can kind of compromise the quality of it. So once we finish that green, you'll do the same thing and you'll move on to the purple. So I'm going to start with my secondary. Again, I'm showing you my mixing so that you can kind of see what I was doing. And I'm going to try to get a really true purple violet. Violet and purple are kind of interchangeable. It's whichever you would like to call it. And as I'm painting this one, I'm kind of noticing that it's a little too blue, so I'm probably going to come back in a minute and add a little bit more red just to make it a little bit more even. So you're going to follow the exact same steps. You're going to then do your blue violet, and this is going to lean pretty heavy to the blue side. So you're going to want to make sure that you grab some of your violet that you've made and add some blue to it. And as you're working around this, I would also make sure that you're leaving some extras to the side of the paint that you blend, especially for your secondary colors, because then you'll have something to add your primary back into to get your tertiary. So once I get that blue violet laid in, I'm going to do my last little section, which is going to be my red violet, and you can see my mixing here. I'm just going to keep showing you my palette as I need to. And you're going to lay in that last color, and then once you get all of that complete, you are done with your acrylic color wheel. Notice my mixing. Look at all of those colors on that paint palette. That's a really good practice for you to do, and this is just a really good way to introduce yourself to the mixing and blending of the colors as you work through our acrylic unit.